I just wanted to start telling you why we thought about organizing this panel. It's part actually of a research, a broader research project that we have in Metz, in the University of Lorraine. And actually more than a research project, it's a situation that we are living through in Metz, in Lorraine. As Department of Theology, an existential situation, as Francis Messner will stress this out later, I suppose, since our very existence as Department of Theology is in question. And it's also an original situation, I think, because it's not our putting it into question comes not from the state or from the secular society, but from the church. So it's it makes us in a peculiar situation, and so I'm gonna stretch out the lines, the main characteristics of this situation, and then I will get a little bit more theoretical because I want to, well, you will see why. I want to get more theoretical, trying not to be too abstract, even though I think I will be, because it's these things that I will be talking about are kind of new to me as well. So what is this situation exactly? The theology department in the University of Lorraine had been founded jointly by the French state and the Roman Catholic Church. Recently, the Bishop of Metz decided not to sponsor the department anymore, meaning he decided to stop sending the seminaries to us, and he decided to stop intervening in the recruiting process of the teachers. He decided that the church should not have any relation to an academic theology anymore, at least in its current form. We, and when I say we, I mean the faculty, we decided that this retrieval of the Roman Church from the university was not a sufficient reason to stop doing theology. Of course, we stopped ipso facto, we stopped doing Roman Catholic theology, into this very precise sense that no subordination link to this church was existing anymore, okay? But we decided that we would keep on doing theology, and we decided that a good aim would be to have a trans-religious or something like that, but we don't know the name we're going to give to this project yet. Something like a trans-religious theology department. Therefore, we recruited a scholar specialized in Islamic studies, and very important, we recruited him on a chair of Muslim theology, which was explicit in the job announced. So literally, we decided to do theology without a church. So I think the question of the relation to the church will be raised again in Francis Messner talk. But now I just want to talk about my own personal situation. I'm sorry about that. I mean, of course, as a teacher and a scholar, not too personal. I don't want to scare you too much. So this situation that happened and that we tried handling the best we could, we did not choose it. Okay, we did not want it to do that in the first place. But at the same time, when it happened, we felt as a collective that this that was happening was an opportunity, almost a necessity, and we felt like the kind of theology we wanted to do was something that was deeply making sense. Even though this sense that we thought our situation was making, this sense was not and is not yet completely clear to us. Hence this panel, among other things that we're doing. So my situation was particularly difficult since my field, or at least the theologian who had the greatest place in my PhD dissertation, a few years ago happens to be Karl Barth. And further, I consider that the way that Barth does theology is probably one of the best way to do theology today. But of course, those of you who know a little of Karl Barth know where I am going now. Our project of a theology without a church seems completely, bluntly antinomic with any Barthian conception of theology. And this is why I gave this paradoxical title to my introduction, and I apologize about it, Church Dogmatics without a church. Because as you know, Barth gave to his masterpiece the title Church Dogmatics in order to insist that there is no place for dogmatics but within the church. And that dogmatic is but a function of the church. So basically now I want to quickly defend that this opposition, this antinomy, is fake. That you can be a Barthian theologian, you can perfectly assume the idea of a theology of dogmatics without the church, and that those two things are not contradictory. So I hope that this defense will not sound too acrobatic. It might sound a little bit acrobatic, but I think it's possible and legitimate, even though it implies to make a distinction that is not so easy to grasp. Because often when people talk about Barth, or even when they read Barth, and I'm not saying that they do what they do with bad intentions necessarily, but when they read Barth and when they speak about Barth, they confuse two levels of his argumentations. Two levels that should not be confused, and many bad or quick judgments on Barth's theology, for instance by Tillich or by Bonhoeffer, comes from such a confusion between those two very different levels that need to be distinguished, not only for my sake, but for the sake of a good reading of Barth. So what are those two levels? There is a fundamental or a foundational level, a meta-theological level, if I might use that vocabulary. The level of the epistemology of theology. And grossly, one can say that at this level, Barth doesn't state much, but the only thing that he states is that theology is founded on revelation, that is to say that theology is not founded at all. There can be theology only through an act of God, and then no human act, or human reasoning, or human institution can guarantee or locate a place or foundation for theology. So at this level of fundamental theology, one can only say that theology is founded, from a human point of view, on a radical uncertainty, on a radical doubt, from a human point of view, on a radical doubt as to whether there is or there can be anything as theology. At this foundational level, epistemological level, one can only say that theology can happen everywhere, with or without, within or without the church, because at the end it can really happen, or as much as we can tell it, it can happen nowhere from a human point of view. But of course, this foundational uncertainty does not mean that there is no theology at all, concretely. It means that theology always happens in a context when a theologian dares doing what she does, when she dares doing what she does, even when she has no certainty that she can do it. And it also means that the theologian should not even talk about this uncertainty. So what I'm doing actually when I state that foundational level is not in in a certain sense, and you will see why later, it's not literally Barthian. Because the theologian should not talk about this uncertainty. It's not her job to talk about this foundational level. Because she must only do what she feels compelled to do concretely in a certain context, to correct a certain way of preaching, of talking about God, and to use her reason as much as she can for that. But she should never try to justify from a universal point of view what she does. But then it means that every time Barth speaks of a certain way of doing theology, every time he criticizes concrete attempts, for instance, to abandon a definite historical church or a certain stream of thought, like liberal Protestantism, a certain stream of thought for being too academic or too far from the institutional church or not confessional enough, he speaks at a second level, not the foundational level that I talked about, but a second level, a contextual level that is made necessary by the uncertainty of the first level, but that has to be distinguished from the first one. So if one were to believe that in so doing he was speaking, so in criticizing and in all his declaration about the church, the historical church, the place of theology within the church, his church, etc., and his own place. When he talks about his own place in the church, he doesn't talk at the level of the epistemology of theology. He talks at a second level, a contextual one that is very different, that should not be confused with the first one, and that has only value in his own thought because of the first level, the level of epistemology, where there is only uncertainty as to whether there can be theology or not, and as to where theology should take place. So if one were to believe that when he talks about his own place, he's speaking at the foundational level, one would be misleading, and one would actually reverse the whole theology of Karl Barth. So what is at stake with the idea of church dogmatics in his own writings is not at all an orthodox dogmatics that would never put itself into question nor add new concepts or methods. Church dogmatics does not mean repetition, of course, of all dogmatics, and it does not mean that the church is constituted once and for all as the only place where there could be theology, and a place that is necessarily right before the world. It means the opposite. It means the object of dogmatics might call for a more radical reconfiguration of dogmatics itself, of its place itself, maybe of the church itself. So this distinction of two levels is the reason why I think one can be a Barthian, and so by being a Barthian, I mean do church dogmatics, but one can do that without a church because the two words, the word church has not the same meaning in the two parts of the sentence. In the first part, it means it's made to mean the foundational level, and the second part is the contextual level. So at the end, the reason why Barth says that dogmatics can only be church dogmatics, he says that, no doubt, is the very reason why dogmatics can also take place outside of church. Because if he says that dogmatics should be churchly, it's because he says that there is no theoretical foundation of theology, and then it can only take place in a certain context. So for this very reason, the reason why he says that dogmatic is only church dogmatics, this reason is also the reason in certain other contexts, maybe dogmatics should be performed outside the church or without the church. So just to be a little bit more precise, what does this mean at this foundational level that theology is a function of the church? I see two meanings, or at least for this morning, we can see two meanings of the word church in this theory. The church first, and its context, and its predication, so because in Barth those two words are used together. The church and its predication are the name, I said that already, are the name of a context. It means that dogmatics are no metaphysics. They aim not at knowing God as such, or for himself, for the sake of pure knowledge, but only to rectify a certain discourse about God. And this discourse, Barth calls it predication. Church is then the place where there is a predication. So actually, this idea of church dogmatics reasserts that there is no philosophical or metaphysical foundation for dogmatics, but only a certain context within which the theologian can talk. Theology is then a practical science. Further, one can say also that theology has no content in itself. Its contents are the discourses held in the church, in the definite context where the theologian speaks. But then one could, of course, object, church is not only a context, of course. Or one could object, what is the difference between a church or any political community or any association? So there is a second meaning to the use of the word church in Barth's prolegomena to dogmatics. At this, we're still talking at this foundational level. At this level, the church is also the name of a task. This task makes the church different, or a church different from any party of political party or association, and the difference is that it can never be certain to possess the right doctrine. So maybe it's actually a common point with contemporary political parties, but at the time when Barth talks, political parties are usually certain of their own doctrine. So the church cannot be certain to possess the right doctrine, nor it can never be certain that it is absolutely wrong. Because only God, from the church point of view, and that is what defines a church, because only God can put it into question, the doctrine of the church, or, on the contrary, only God can declare it right in an absolute manner. Because the idea of a church, and not of an association, of a club, etc., is that it is founded in memory and to the purpose of someone else. And this someone is the only one who can decide whether or not the purpose is fulfilled. So what does it mean? It means that the church always has to seek for its own doctrine because of its own nature, and not because the world asks the church to do it. The church has to seek for its own doctrine, because of its own nature. But there is another paradox here. The more a church is concerned with its own object, the more it must take the world into account, because the world is not foreign to its own mission. And the other religions, the other churches, are of course part of the world. And as such, they are part of its own mission, especially nowadays. So it is not the society versus the church or the churches that is pluralistic and secular. It is the church as well, as such. Because the church uses society as a way to ask itself the question that God is asking it. So the task is to keep God, since I said that church means primarily a task, The task is to keep God as a question mark to dogmas and preaches, and to this task, society and pluralism and secularity are helping her, helping the church. Sorry, I don't know if I should say it or her with the church. I always confuse the two pronouns, but... So once we have stated these two main meanings of the notion that theology is a function of the church, what does it mean for us? The question, of course, that we should ask, or at least that we could ask ourselves, is what if the context has changed? The task for theology to be church theology has not changed, but maybe the context change implies that the means to fulfill the task should be very different. This is something Barth himself takes into account as a possibility. Rarely, but he does, so the possibility that the context changes so much that the theologian has to do theology, to perform theology without the church. Of course, it's rare, says Barth, because he calls this the prophetic possibility. So the prophet, indeed, is someone who has to do theology without and sometimes even against the church. Our project is of more modest praise, of course. But maybe there could be a state of the church when theology has to be performed out of the church today. Maybe pluralism has become so strong that there is no meaningful predication that could ignore it, and that church itself cannot provide that kind of taking into account the pluralism that would be necessary to give us the best correction to its own predication. And in this case, maybe dogmatics should be now performed without the church, but for the sake of the church, not exactly in a prophetic position, but more of a critique that the institution cannot allow itself anymore for many reasons. Okay, so I've been far too long and far too complicated. I'm sorry. As I said, it's a work in progress. So I just wanted to make you aware of this situation and to give some things to thought. If you want, we can have some few questions now, and if not, we are going to go on with the next talk and discuss later. But it's as you prefer. Yes?
I have one question. So you mentioned that following Barth, theology is unfounded, so the foundational issue, etc. But you started by focusing on the issue of theology as a university discipline, and all other disciplines are actually founded. So the epistemological reflection for them is present. So I wanted to ask you about this.
Okay. Well, first I wonder whether other disciplines are actually founded. I mean, it's not something so obvious that even mathematics maybe are not so well founded.
Well, sorry, but mathematical logic is precisely the discipline about the foundations of
Yes, but as you know, there is a lot of debates about the mere possibility.
Debates, so the foundation is
Yeah, of course. Oh, that's it. Okay, I understand your question. So, but yeah. So first of all, I would like to talk about my own what I tried to say. I agree. The question you are raising is concerns the relation of theology to the other academic disciplines, and
it's from the foundational perspective, because
because
apparently, I think that this is one of the key features of specificity of theology following what you presented compared to the other disciplines, and so the lack of any foundational reflection.
So your question is about the specificity of theology.
My question is, okay, we have a discipline that, according to my following, excludes all foundational reflection from itself. Okay, and on the other hand, we have plenty of disciplines who.
Okay, so it does not exclude. Yeah, I understand. So it does not exclude foundational reflection. It concludes that when you think about foundations in theology, you come to the conclusion quite fast that you cannot and you should not want to have it founded. That the foundation is not a good task to perform for theology. Okay, yeah. But it does not exclude foundational reflection. Actually, that is foundational reflection. It's just that the foundation that you find is not a foundation. It's the fact that there can be no foundation, and the proper scientificity of theology relies in that discovery. Okay. So, and the second question. So, of course, from the point of view of the other academic disciplines, it might sound weird, but so there would be a lot to say about that. I cannot really tell anything now, but because my point here was not to talk. When you ask the question of academic theology, you have two problems. You have a problem of legitimacy among academia, among other academic disciplines, and this is the question you're asking, and it's a fair question. And you have a problem of legitimacy related to the church. And the question is whether when you stop doing theology within the church, you don't lose the soul of theology. So my talk was concerned with this second aspect. And I understand there is another one. I think we're going to talk about it later, but I have nothing to say more about that now. But I think the only thing I can say is that saying that there is no possible foundation is not the same at all than not wanting to reflect on the foundational level, because there are a lot of reflection in Barth at the foundational level. It's just that the conclusion is different, but it's not, and there is no leap of faith or anything in Barth. There is no place in theology where you stop reflecting, when you stop reasoning. So in that regard,
yes, I was not interested in Barth and its
yeah, in general.